All right, today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to dive into a 2,000-year-old sermon, but here's the twist. We're not looking at it as some dusty old religious text. Nope. We're going to treat it as an absolute masterclass in persuasive communication, delivered by none other than the Apostle Paul.
So let's just try to put ourselves in Paul's shoes for a second, right? The challenge he was facing was huge. He's in the city of Antioch, in front of an audience that knows their stuff. I mean, they know their history inside and out. They're a familiar crowd, but a tough one. And his job is to introduce this world-changing idea, knowing that a direct approach was never going to work. So how on earth does he pull it off? Well, Paul knew he was the outsider in the room. He couldn't just get up there and be like, hey, believe me because I said so. He had zero authority with this crowd. Relying on his own testimony would have been a huge mistake, super easy for them to just dismiss. So he had to get creative. He had to find a much, much smarter way in.
And this is where we see his genius move. Instead of making the whole thing about him and his own credibility, which was risky, he makes it about them. He decides to build his entire case on their shared history, the stories they all knew, the story of Israel. It's just a brilliant way to build common ground and get them nodding along before he even gets to his main point.
Okay, but wait. Before he even dives into the story, he does something really subtle but absolutely crucial. He has to redefine one single word for them, a concept that is the linchpin for his entire argument, the idea of a king. He has to totally shift how they think about what a real leader is. And this is so important. You know, for his audience, a king probably meant power, money, a guy who rules over you. But Paul flips that script completely. He says, no, a true king, a biblical king, is a protector, someone who takes responsibility, who gets out in front to fight for their people. It's about sacrifice, not about being the boss. This new definition becomes the lens for everything that follows.
So, with that new definition locked in, Paul starts his story. And where does he begin? With a total disaster, a cautionary tale. He brings up their very first king, a guy named Saul.
And Saul's story is the perfect example of a leader who just fails the test. Picture this. He's about to go into this huge battle. The prophet, Samuel, is supposed to do this really important pre-battle ritual, but he's late. The pressure is on, Saul's army is starting to freak out and desert, and he panics. He just takes matters into his own hands and does the sacrifice himself, totally disobeying a direct order. See, his big failure wasn't a lack of courage. It was that he chose his own fear over trust. So that's it. King Saul is out, he's rejected. And his failure creates this huge opening, right? A power vacuum. This is what sets up the whole next part of the story. God needs a new leader, but this time he's looking for something totally different.
And this kicks off the search for the next king. And here's where Paul points out this super fascinating detail. God's hiring criteria, they are completely backwards from what any of us would expect. It's not about who looks the part anymore.
And this quote right here is the pivot for the entire argument. Paul is basically saying, hey, you guys already know this from your own scriptures. People, we get impressed by the tall, strong guy with the perfect resume. But God, he's looking at something you can't see. He's looking at the heart.
And the story he tells proves it perfectly. The prophet Samuel goes to this guy Jesse's house, and he sees these 7 older sons, and they look the part. They're tall, strong warrior types. Samuel himself sees the first one and thinks, yep, this has got to be him. But God keeps saying no, no, no. Finally, Samuel has to ask, are these all the sons you have? And that's when they mention the youngest kid, David, a shepherd boy who wasn't even important enough to be invited to the meeting. They bring him in, and that's when God says, that's the one. He was chosen for the one thing nobody else could see, his heart.
Okay, so let's recap. Paul has just retold these 2 super famous stories, the king who failed and the underdog who succeeded. And now comes the killer move. He takes this history, which is like 400 years old, and he yanks it right into the present moment, right there in that room.
He just lays it out so clearly, you can't miss it. Step 1, you guys needed a king, but the first one, Saul, he blew it. Step 2, so God chose David, a man after his own heart, and promised a true Savior king would come from his family line. And then, step 3, Paul drops the bomb. He says, guess what? That promise, it's been fulfilled, right now. The true king, the one who is the ultimate protector, the one willing to lay down his life, he's here, and his name is Jesus. And just like that, you see how the whole story of Saul and David, it was all building to this one single point.
But hold on, there's one more little detail here that is so important. It adds this layer of humanity to the whole thing. And it's about that specific phrase, a man after God's own heart.
See, Paul's audience knew their history. They knew David wasn't perfect his entire life, from Pharet, and the source material really spells this out. That phrase, it wasn't a lifelong title. It was a snapshot. It described David in that specific moment when he was chosen. At that time, he was a person with a pure heart, totally open to what God wanted. This makes the whole thing so much more relatable, right? It's not about finding some flawless person, but about the condition of your heart when it matters most.
So what are the big takeaways for us from all this? First, persuasion isn't about shouting facts, it's about telling a shared story. Second, if you can redefine the key terms, you can control the whole argument. Paul also shows us how powerful it is to contrast failure with success. It really makes the point stick. But the main thing, it's that real leadership. What truly matters, it's about what's on the inside, not just what's on the outside.
And that leaves us with this final thought, a question that's just as real for us today as it was 2,000 years ago. When we choose our leaders, in our jobs, our communities, our countries, what do we value more? Are we like Samuel at first, impressed by the appearance and the qualifications? Or are we trying to look deeper, for that character, for the quality of their heart? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer.